So how do you feel about the concept where a composer will write a piece for a particular instrument, like maybe your violin concerto #1, and then they'll write it for a different orchestration, like oboe or flute?
It will depend on the piece,
Mm-hmm.
I think, but it is possible to do that. You know, you have to be very careful, and you have to understand what, you know, you can change the orchestration, I think, without terrible problems, for the most part, unless you get into things like wind machines and you know, brake drums. You know, yeah, you can find something that will be similar, but there are times, but that's usually exotic instruments for the most part. I think if we're talking about pitched instruments, I don't think there's a problem. You know, you can't. We're doing that right now with a Peace of Mind for the March 29th concert. But it's, as I say, for the full orchestra, if this is it. But I'm reducing it for a much, much smaller band over there.
Okay.
I would say that they're getting closer. The idea of orchestras sounding different, which is a game we used to play at the conservatory, which we would get together with, 4 or 5 people, and they each wrote some recordings, and then you could look at who they were, and then they would play it on the record player, and we had to guess which orchestra it was.
Yeah.
And I mean, it sounds very difficult, but it really wasn't, because there was a sound that the Philadelphia had, and there was sound that the Chicago had, sound that New York had, the sound that Berlin had, the sound that the Russian orchestras had. You could tell really very easily by brass.
Yeah.
You know, brass and woodwinds, they had a very, very clear-cut different sound. Well, different. I don't want to make it overly different. It was not overly, but for people who understand the oboe, I always found the oboe from the recordings in the 60s and 70s a little troublesome with the Berlin Philharmonic, because there was a certain kind of way that he played it, the way he got the overtone, that was different. But this is also true, for instance, the Soviet horn players, tended to have more vibrato and all sorts of other things. And they tended to play everything like, in singing, we call belting.
Yep. No.
Okay? So yeah, I mean, one could, depends what kind of details you want to go into. But you can really dissect those and clearly study the different sides of that. It's become much more cosmopolitan.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the reason is that most orchestras right now, all over the world, have players from all over the world.
Yeah.
In other words, if you look at the players right now that we have, let's say in New York or LA, in them are a number of Soviet players, a number from China, and so on. I mean, so you have to find a much more, geopolitically, democratic sound rather than being nationalistic.
Right. So it's becoming more uniform.
Yeah.
Even while styles are becoming much more
diverse.
diverse.
They all change a little bit. Even when they try to be, they really cannot. And particularly if you have, what I would call a gifted conductor who has a sense of sound that they want.
Right.
Then they will change that orchestra. I mean, certainly Ormandy did that with the Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of tremendous sounding, not dated at all. You listen to the recordings made in the 50s by Fritz Reiner in Chicago. They have the same sound.
Right.
But it's a very clean, lean, and brilliant, virtuosic sound. And that tradition there has maintained. Even under other conductors, they've maintained that. But each one brings in their prejudices, we say. And so I don't know. I think it's a good thing. I like the idea of hearing certain kinds of sounds. The Vienna Orchestra still does have a certain kind of sound,
Mm-hmm.
which is mellow and, has a feel of wine in it.
Okay.
I think, So
Yeah.
in terms of Ukraine, no, I mean, yeah, they have a sound that's a little bit different, but they're also, a lot of the younger ones are trying to improve, and I'm glad, because the woodwind instruments, very particularly, and even brass, but were always chosen by people who couldn't make it with the violin or the
Okay.
strings. You couldn't play in that particular spot, then you went and you did another instrument, and it was never necessarily the instrument you loved. I mean, you grew to love it because that's what happens, but they said, well, I want to be in an orchestra, so you pick something that is needed.
Yeah, absolutely.